Okay, welcome. So, in case you're lost, we are speaking to UAA today. So, we plan to spend some time discussing the user account and authentication server, specifically UAA as an identity proxy, as well as a number of other ideas and evolutions of the tool that we have both planned and others that we've put in motion. We'll start off with some introductions.
Hi, I'm Andrew Wittrock. I am a software engineer on the UAA team at Pivotal for about the last year.
And I'm Dan Beneke. I'm the PM on the UAA team, and I've been the UAA project lead just this year. I will spend some time starting off with a discussion about our vision and look to highlight some of the goals that we have for the future of UAA. And I'll turn it over to Andrew. He's going to detail some of the strategic changes that we're considering and the benefits that we consider to be aligned with each of those.
All right, so before we get into the details, we wanted to make sure everyone understood the basic functions and definitions of the terms we're using that describe what the UAA is and what some of the core functionality is that it offers today. It's composed of several components, including an OAuth service provider, an identity proxy, and identity provider capabilities. Identity providers are purposeful identity stores. They are the source of truth for where your actual identity lies. An identity proxy connects those IDPs to federate identity from one or more sources to the platform. An OAuth service provider component uses this identity to issue signed tokens for users and clients. The UAA issues ID, access, bearer, and refresh tokens. Those various tokens are for authentication purposes or granting access to resources on the server or refreshing without further user interaction. Authentication as a term is who you are, and authorization is more what you can do, just so that you don't get those terms too confused. And the internal user store that we'll reference can be used to store identity, although its most common use case is more to store references to the true source of this identity.
Okay, so that's kind of the basic terminology, basic components that we want to make sure you're aware of when you think of UAA. So we'll start off with an analogy, and for the purpose of this conversation, let's imagine that UAA as a Swiss Army knife. As we feel the two share some common characteristics. So like a Swiss Army knife, UAA is versatile. It serves many different purposes. We think it's a very useful and practical tool. It helps you achieve various solutions for different needs. It also provides a little something for everyone. We get to interact with a very broad customer base that is using this tool in many different types of ways with many different users. We would consider both of them to be a bit like customizable. So there's different features that you can choose from. There's different options in the way that you implement or you kind of set up that tool. And both products have been around for some time. They've become trusted solutions. But we should also consider that they could be considered a bit bulky. They're heavy. They may not fit well into kind of your ideal space. And for some users, they offer more than is needed. In reality, you may end up using only one or two of the tools offered, meaning that the others just get carried around and kind of produce or create bulk. And lastly, with so many options and so many kind of additions, they're difficult to master. So you may end up with tools that you don't know how to efficiently operate. So if we think of the UAA as serving many purposes like a Swiss Army knife, we can think of it kind of in this way, right? Like we break it down and there's a lot of different components that are built into the one tool that we call UAA. So in the context of UAA, you can imagine kind of laying out all of the different parts across the table and identifying each with its own name and its own primary purpose. And you would have quite a few of them across the table. Keeping all of these tools bundled together in something that we refer to as UAA can be helpful at times, but it can also make choosing the right tool a bit difficult, especially the right tool for a specific job. And it creates a significant challenge to learn how to be efficient in your use of each of those tools. So if you've ever used a Swiss Army knife or kind of held one in your hand, you've maybe had that moment where you've spent time pulling each of the tools kind of out of the case, examining it, evaluating it for its intended purpose, maybe even testing its use to success or to failure, but ultimately just trying to find the right tool that matches your need. And in supporting UAA, we've seen that that is an experience that can be kind of similar in the use of UAA and a Swiss Army knife. You're left to spend time trying several different tool options in order to find the right one and to be efficient at your use of that tool for that purpose. So the combination of these different available tools, along with the various ways in which you can use them, can ultimately create confusion for the user and lead us towards some undesired product outcomes, some undesired product experiences. Additionally, the bundling of all of these tools together can cause you to carry and to maintain tools that maybe aren't that important to you or that ultimately you don't even need. So in supporting UAA, we find users frequently left to wonder, am I using the best tool for the job at hand? How do I select the right tool with so many different options? In a support scenario, when asking for support, how much effort does it take to describe the issue well and to make sure that the person supporting you understands what you're doing, what component of UAA you're using, and what you intend, what outcome you're trying to achieve? And lastly, how much effort and time will it take to become an efficient user? Like, what does proficiency look like when there are so many options, several of which you may never need to touch? So if we take a moment and look at this from a support perspective, the manufacturer experience is a different set of challenges. For them, providing ample documentation and instruction as to how to best use each tool and to support each customer's use case and use of each tool can require significant training and a fairly long path to mastery. It's likely that the support conversations need to include very specific context about which tool is being used and how it's being used in order to have an effective support discussion. So with all of that in mind, we're looking at ways in which UAA could evolve to offer a simpler experience for both the user and the provider. We're focused on modernization, ease of support, modularization of the different tool components, enhanced security, and a renewed focus on UAA's most utilized core identity strengths.
So, with all that said, this is not an exhaustive list, but there are functions and features that we intend to focus on first and hope will continue to define UAA's primary purpose. So this is a list of items that we thought UAA should be really good at. First being security. This is a security product. It is identity management. So we want to make sure we have a strong focus on that to preempt any vulnerabilities and be thoughtful about exposed surface area. Second, it's important that we connect to your chosen external IDPs, your identity providers. We want to provide flexibility by seamlessly connecting to your chosen, typically pre-existing source of identity. Most of you will have some sort of source of identities, clients, any identity that is existing in your infrastructure, and we want to make sure that we can connect to that, to proxy that. Which brings us to proxying identity services. So we want to offer a federated identity. We want to connect to a single or set of IDPs and offer a centralized experience. Consuming and establishing external group mappings is important. We want to ensure that the decisions that you make with your IDP can be expressed through the UAA. Token management, of course, being a core feature of an OAuth server, is important to us. We want that to be our focus over identity management itself. We want to strongly conform to the OIDC and OAuth 2 specifications. And lastly, with the trends in the industry, we want to make sure we play well in a Kubernetes environment, which means modernizing the UA to ease its evolution onto those platforms and looking for opportunities to improve our security posture.
So taking us back to our analogy, so if a Swiss Army knife represents UA in its current state, we need to choose an item that represents UA's future state. And in the spirit of CF Summit moving from Basel, Switzerland to Den Haag, Netherlands, we chose a familiar Dutch staple, the kaashof, or cheese slicer. The Dutch produce lots of tasty cheeses, so this is a tool that gets put to use frequently. But if we do that, and we use the kaashof as an example, we really need to consider the kaashof alongside its related components, which in combination with each other can provide for specific needs and very specific outcomes. They can be used together if needed, or separately if that's the simplest requirement. They're more modular and end up being more simplified and specialized than our Swiss Army knife was. So by focusing on the modularization and the modernization of core components, removal of less valuable features, and the improvement of otherwise complicated interactions and choices between these tools, we hope to achieve a simplified tool set that offers benefits to customers, operators, and support staff alike. So when we think of ways in which we could accomplish this, there are a couple of changes that come to mind for us. Separation of identity, identity provider functionality from identity proxy features, which currently are both built inside of UAA. Finding opportunities to deprecate little or unused features. What is that bulk that we're carrying around that we could move to the side, eliminate, or detach? Improved adherence to specifications. That certainly offers simplicity. Strengthening high availability support, and overall tooling modernization.
All right, so wanted to walk through some of the impacts and benefits of this approach we're taking to an involved structure. So extracting the identity provider functionality is probably something that might sound scary to people, but if we do this, what it'll allow us to do is we can focus on proxying identity from the provider to the platform, and it'll actually help us enforce consistency in integration between the various IDPs. And we won't have to ask questions like, are you using an internal user store? And it'll clear up some of the issues between different foundations and so forth. When we're talking about deprecation of lesser used features, we're talking about identity at core being an IDP concern. And so when we extract that out, the current MFA will sort of be extracted with it because it's linked to the internal user management. And so it'll be carried and externalized. Movement of the MFA and SAML IDP reduce the surface area of the product and delegate the concern to the external source of identity. And what I mean by that is the UA currently will function as a SAML IDP on its own. So we're still planning on connecting to SAML IDPs and proxying that identity, but as a service provider instead of a SAML IDP itself within the UA. And doing this will allow the UA to focus on authentication across the platform rather than the core identity concerns of an IDP. Our high availability efforts, the first part of it is session management, which currently is done per JVM, and it results in a need for session affinity. And this requires some bespoke routing logic to make sure that you can carry through the flows. If we externalize these session records, then you'll be able to horizontally scale the UA without sticky session routing logic or issues surrounding that. and it'll allow the UA to be placed behind a generic load balancer, router, or proxy to complete transactions across multiple UAs. Specification adherence is important because it'll allow us to align with industry standards and reduce unexpected behavior, and will allow us to have better integration with third-party systems. It'll also allow us to reduce modification of community libraries, which increases maintainability. So, all that said, that's the current idea of the UA and what we're looking at. And our vision is evolving. But it's focused on the benefits that this increased simplicity and modularization might offer us all. So while we're reimagining the future of UA, we've spent some time focusing on making plans to eliminate some of its painful interactions, issues that people have, as well as working to keep it modern and secure. So to start, we have some ongoing efforts surrounding our CLI. The current CLI, for anyone that's used it, is the UAC, and it is a Ruby CLI. And part of using a Ruby CLI is you need a full development toolset just to run it. And we don't think that's a reasonable ask for all of our platform operators or end users, anyone that's using it. It's difficult or impossible to run on a Windows environment or an air-gapped system. Anyone that's had the experience of trying to get Ruby working in Windows? Yep, I see. Yeah, someone's had that pain. Yep, corporate proxy, all sorts of fun stuff. It can be difficult because it's not just installing Ruby, it's getting all your gems and all that. Obviously, an air-gapped system, you're going to have problems with network. And also, the command syntax is a little bit disparate from other Cloud Foundry CLIs. This is kind of an additional mental burden that's really not needed in an already complex system. And thinking about these extra command line syntax structures can possibly lead to mistakes, have problems with actually fetching a token, maybe use the wrong syntax, and that causes you issues. So we want to eliminate some of that. Part of that effort is actually focusing work on the Go CLI, which was presented at a previous point as in progress. But we have a renewed focus on that because we've come to the point where we really think that to make the platform easier for people to use, we need to put some efforts on it. So, benefits of a Go CLI. Compiled binary for multiple targets. So we're going to produce the binaries, and we actually have produced some already for the main targets that we're hitting. There's no requirement on runtime dependencies. You get a binary, you can run it. It's easily packaged for a release and can be run on an air-gapped system as long as you get that binary on there. And the verb-noun syntax is a bit clearer, and it aligns more closely with the other Cloud Foundry CLIs. So we think it's a much better path. There are a few caveats that I just wanted to mention. It's in active development, but it's in the incubator, which means it's not quite ready for prime time. It's not going to replace UAC completely until we're confident that it covers all of the community use cases that are core to the product. So this is feedback is welcome for any issues you have with it if you try it out. And the documentation needs a bit of improvement, which is an effort we'll be charging forward with. But until those are resolved, we can't really go towards a GA. So if you're interested in that, please lend some support out to us and tell us what you need from it. Another major sort of tooling makeover we're doing is we are evolving towards life with Kubernetes. This is a big push. You've heard it everywhere. The platform is going to support KAIDs, and we need to move with the times to make sure we are covering the use cases that everyone needs on the platform. So, as mentioned, HA support is going to be a big thing, and we talked briefly, but externalizing that session allows the horizontal scaling without session affinity, and importantly removes a hard dependency on routing logic. Currently it is a hard dependency, but we are planning on removing that dependency to make sure that whatever your chosen solution is, it works. And it'll allow greater flexibility in configuration, provides the ability to use the UA behind any generic proxy load balancer, whatever you want to use. The big question is probably auth-z, so authentication authorization in the Kubernetes world. For the control plane itself, the concerns are probably the biggest. And so the plans are authorization concerns are going to be sort of handled according to Kubernetes norms, but authentication as a core UAA concern will be working in tandem with that platform fine-grained access control. This allows us to decouple the concerns rather than having a combined authentication authorization. We get to decouple it and it'll allow UAA to service in its current capacity, but also operate for the future supporting these Kubernetes offerings. So, I mentioned the sort of K8s world before, and this is sort of a speculative diagram of how it could work for control plane integration and implementation. For user client access on dev, you'll probably operate in a more traditional sense. Like your user identity is a little bit different, but this is sort of the big idea and change for the K8s world. Kubernetes uses the OIDC spec to authenticate. So that means in the Kubernetes world, UA is going to provide ID tokens. These are Java Web Tokens. They're signed and handed over to the Kubernetes API server via kubectl or a client to validate. So generally how the flow works here is the user or client requests authentication with UA. The UA as a proxy goes to this identity provider and makes sure that there's a record and everything matches up and says, yes, that's a user. UA, once it has that, can provide an ID token, which can be provided to kubectl or a client, and then that will be provided to the API server from there. The Kubernetes API server will use that signed ID token, and then in its chosen authorization strategy will sort of assign whatever authorization it needs to it based on the identity of what groups are managed for that user client. So by doing this, it positions UA as sort of a focused authentication product that proxies the identity to the preferred providers, and it presents a common interface for Kubernetes authentication. And sort of the most important part of this is that it should be familiar to current Kubernetes operators.
So I think as a team and as a community, we have a lot ahead of us, and we're asking for your input on some specific topics, but just generally kind of as we head down this path. We're specifically interested in knowing what pain points you've encountered while doing some of the things that you see here. Implementing group mappings between your chosen IDP and UAA. There's a lot of different options there, and we know that the path you take can be different and sometimes difficult. Configuring a new IDP on your UAA. So if UAA is never going to be the IDP, we're always going to rely on an external IDP, then we need to make sure that that is a seamless transaction. And the last one that we've listed here is using UAA in a K8s environment. So any of you that have begun experimenting or begun using UAA in that context, we want to learn from those experiences and see what was painful about it, where UAA maybe lacks in functionality or efficiency, and start patching those up. Being aware of your experience can help us guide our actions and allow us to evolve UAA into a stronger identity proxy, which is on the list of the several of, I think it was 6 things that we think UAA should be really darn good at. So we're asking for feedback. There are several ways to get in contact with the team. You can reach out on GitHub, any of the kind of multiple UAA projects. You can Slack us. We have a Slack channel on the Cloud Foundry workspace. You can start a conversation through the CFDev mailing list, or tomorrow we're running office hours, so we would encourage you to stop by there as well. As far as content for the kind of formal conversation, you've seen it, so thank you. We'll leave you with our contact info up here on the screen, and we're going to stick around for a bit afterwards for any like specific questions that you have. As mentioned, we're running office hours tomorrow in the Foundry from 2:40 p.m. to 3:10 p.m. And we encourage anyone to stop by if you have questions or just want to have a general discussion about the purpose of UAA, kind of the path that we're taking UAA, and some of the changes ahead. Thank you. And if there are any questions, we're happy to try and cover them. Start us off.
Right. The question, as I understand it, is I focused on the control plane itself and our plans for that, but didn't go into detail as far as a more traditional application level user and client management. So there are no current plans to eliminate the UA from that realm. We're still going to be evolving, but we're still maintaining some of the support for everything that's come before it. So we'll still have your traditional sort of application level management. So don't worry, we're not getting rid of that. What that picture looks like as we evolve the product to sort of focus more on authentication is going to be kind of guided by what we find as we do that. But just want to make sure we're not eliminating that. We're still planning on supporting everyone on that. It's just that it might be a slightly different configuration than the control plane itself. Does that kind of answer your question? Cool. Anyone else? Sorry, anyone else? Nothing scary? Everything sound good? Yeah, so the different identity zones, that's been a topic of some discussion. We are currently evaluating to see how it is going to be used in the platform going forward. So there aren't any solid plans. Currently, it's just sort of in the UA still.
Sure. I can say we are aware of some of our heaviest users that have implemented against identity zones and the multi-zone management within UA. We are in conversations with them to understand if there are options, like if they can move away from it, or if UA needs to continue to support it. So I think if you have a specific use case, we would want to be aware of that. So either afterwards or tomorrow during office hours, or just in the forum, I would love to have that discussion with you. Because we are exploring it, and I think if we could step UAA away from kind of the identity zone component, we might take that opportunity, but we don't have a path to do that yet. Sure. The Perm project, yeah. Anything you want to start with? Highly evolving, I would say. So I think there is some understanding that the efforts that had, if you're aware of the Perm project as of several years ago, I think that is being reevaluated as maybe being useful again. I think you see some of the presentations have been around like, is it the V3? And some of the hurdles that existed for the Perm project when it first existed seem to have been reduced or eliminated. And so we are watching as a team and as a project, like if Perm is reinstated, and if so, what goals are defined for that, that body. And we suspect that we will be highly coupled with them around kind of the authorization component. There's a lot of discussion right now in the UA team around what our role is for auth-N versus auth-Z, specifically in the future. So when we get to like a Kubernetes-based environment, what that might look like. So I don't have a definitive answer for you on that one, but it is kind of an unknown for us at this point and generates a lot of discussion. Okay, I think we're at time. So if anyone had any other questions you wanted to address personally, we'll stick around. And then if you see either of us on the floor, please stop and say hello. Thank you.